series. I'd like to thank Renee. Renee, stand up. Renee is now in the European Union delegation, but he's here in an informal capacity. But we thank him for his contacts, his ideas about this series. We've taken a few months off, but doesn't mean we've all been cured yet. And so we're very happy to have Jason. How do you pronounce him? Chare from Tokyo English Lifeline, thanks to whom we've had several very good lectures, and he's going to talk to us about the challenge of mental health after March 11 and before the next wave, basically. So, the floor is yours. Maybe you have an hour, something like that. And then, we'll have our usual Q&A session. I'm sorry, it's a little hard. We are enforcing our landlord's edicts, but so far we have had no heat strokes. And I'm sure we have numerous physicians here in the audience who can help. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So yes, my name is Jason Chare. I'm the Director of Life Lines Services at TEL, Tokyo English Lifeline. I think this is the third time we come to talk. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges of mental health in Japan after March 11th. That's actually quite a broad title, so I'm going to talk kind of more specifically, really all about TEL. I mean, it's what I do, it's what we do as an organization, how we responded to the psychosocial and mental health demands of the disaster, how we helped coordinate some efforts, and the role that we played. And then in describing the actions that we took, I thought it would be useful maybe to share with you just some of the challenges that we experienced, or we saw going on within the mental health field. It'll be interesting to hear your thoughts about that afterwards as well. Just to summarize my presentation then, we're going to talk about what is TEL. I'll probably, to be honest, my leaning will be a little more towards the lifeline, because I guess it's kind of what I do. But I will introduce all aspects of our organisation. I'll talk a little bit about this sort of the public health model and specialised care, and explain that a little bit more in detail as we go along. How TEL responded to the disaster, and then a little bit just sort of looking forward, what we learned and how we're going to move forward from that. So very quickly, what is TEL? TEL stands for Tokyo English Lifeline. Our name, to be honest, is a little dated now because English, well, we provide face-to-face counselling in multiple languages. We're not just a lifeline, and we don't only serve Tokyo, so we have a pretty terrible name. But we've been around for 40 years in the community, so the name has sort of established itself somewhat. So we're stuck with it for now. We're a registered non-profit. We're affiliated with Lifeline International. We actually branched out from the International Denmark. That's where we were born from in 1973. They were getting a lot of calls to the Lifeline, the Japanese Lifeline, International Denmark, from people that couldn't speak Japanese and were looking for help. And they saw the need for other language lifelines in the community, and that's where TEL was born from. We're also accredited by the Smart Institute, a face-to-face counselling centre. Very quickly, our history then, established in 1973. In the early 90s, we started doing face-to-face counselling by professional therapists. In 2006, relatively recently, we became a registered non-profit. And just in 2009, we launched Children and Families, and that's the third branch of what TEL does. And then I'll explain that a little bit more in detail. Basically, our mission throughout the 40 years has been to look out into the community, see what resources are missing, and with whatever limited resources we have as a non-profit, try and fill the gaps and provide support for the community. So there are our three main services, and I'll quickly run through. So first of all, the Lifeline. So the Lifeline, it's free, it's anonymous. Obviously, it's available nationwide or even internationally if you want to call Japan. And it's manned by trained telephone counsellors. We run our own training program. It lasts 3 to 4 months, and we do it twice a year. The Lifeline is available every day, accessible anywhere, and we respond to about 7,000 calls a year. I say we respond to, that is not the number of calls that we get. We don't actually know how many calls we get. Even after 40 years, TEL's Lifeline is one line, one person sitting in front of one telephone for 40 years. So if you call and the line is busy, then you just have to keep trying. We'll call call elsewhere. So we're able to respond to 7,000 calls a year. We would like to be able to respond to more. Something people are often surprised about, 60% of our calls are Japanese. I think when we originally started, the concept was that we would serve the international community. However, things have evolved since then, and 60%, about 65 last year, are actually Japanese, and I think that reflects an increasing internationalized Japanese community that chooses to call our Lifeline, even though it's only in English. About 75% of our calls are counseling issues, and I'll describe some of those issues. About 10% now is for information. That also has evolved. 10, 15 years ago, it was about 50-50. And again, when the Lifeline started, there were a lot of calls for information because there were limited resources available. Now that's shifted. Most of our calls, 75%, are for counselling issues. The issues tend to be probably similar to other areas of mental health, depression, anxiety, very high. As a Lifeline, loneliness is quite high. But a broad range of issues. And so our telephone counsellors that we train are trained to be able to respond. They have to be able to respond to a broad range of issues. Anything from pregnancy issues, rape, domestic violence, suicide is about nearly 1.9% of calls are suicide rate. Or at least that is where the caller has an intention or is actively suicidal. The percentage of calls that have ideation is low. And we still field information calls as well. This is an example of the broad range that we do respond to. In the early 90s, we started telecounselling. Now, telecounselling is the professional end of what we do. We have licensed professional therapists, mostly, I think, probably all Western trained. And TEL has basically, with telecounselling, has tried, I think, to establish itself as accredited as a reputable place for you to seek counselling. So in Japan, it's a little shaky. Basically, anybody can probably set up shop, really, as a counsellor if they wish to. So what I think telecounselling tries to do is establish itself as a place of trust. And all the counsellors are accredited and licensed. They're also, because we're a non-profit, they do operate on a flexible fee basis. We do not like to turn people away. So if someone comes with limited income, we will try to work with them. Now, bearing in mind we have limited resources, but we will try to do the best we can to provide some form of support. Most recently, we developed TEL Children Families. This is really a sub-branch of TEL counselling, so again, it's the professional end of what we do. They take a team-based approach, so we have a range of people with different specialities, counselling, testing, assessments, to help children and families. And the response, actually, since we started this, has been terrific. I think we're not really able to keep up with the demand. And again, I mentioned our mission, to look out for the community, see what gaps are in the community, try to fill them with whatever resources we have. So we have quite a comprehensive range of services that go from the kind of specialised care end of things to the more sort of public health model, sort of like trained volunteers supporting the community, boosting resilience. Within what we do, we have a number of projects and programs that work with the community. Under the children and families, we have child protection, we have exceptional parenting, we have a school awareness program that goes out to schools and talks about the Lifeline and lets young people know that there is a safe, confidential place that they can call if there's an issue they want to talk about. Within the Lifeline, we also run a suicide awareness program. Again, we're reaching out into the community. We also, online, we try to provide as many services as possible, links to resources. We have Wikital, which is an online directory, so if you're looking for an English-speaking doctor, lawyer, or whatever, you can look there. And a range of things. We have TeamSpace to have teams, etc. So basically, trying to sum up what we're trying to do here, we're trying to cover the spectrum, I think. At the top, we have the professional end, specialised care, and the bottom, more of a sort of public health model, working with the community, training people in the community to provide support. For people. It's very sort of preventative, I guess. The public health model looks to help people. I mean, the Lifeline, for example, talks to people. They call the Lifeline. They're under stress. They have an opportunity to talk about it. It has a preventative role, hopefully, by preventing further problems developing. But it crosses both lines. I mean, this aspect as well, too, there's a lot of outreach. A lot of outreach into companies, into schools, and working with the community. So as everyone in this room, I'm sure, is quite aware, on March 11th, a major earthquake, followed by a tsunami. And what happened was, not in one specific acute stressor, but really what followed was, I think, a situation of chronic stress, where you had aftershocks following for weeks afterwards, following Fukushima. So the whole of the community under a tremendous amount of stress. I think TEL, as an organisation, we felt that we had a role to play using the services that we had, as well as connecting with other organisations to see how else we could get involved. We felt that we had to respond to what happened and to get involved in, I suppose, the recovery process. In the short term, we could respond with our lifeline, with face-to-face counselling, and with information on the website as a very quick response. But we also tried to take a long-term view as well. There is that natural reaction, and we had calls to the lifeline from people who were literally saying, okay, I want to go. Where do I go? And, we'd be like, well, hold on a second. Let's take a deep breath. And that's really what we did as an organisation. We tried to assess the situation, and decide where can we, as an organisation, best apply ourselves to have the most effect. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about 5 key areas that we focused on. Through our lifeline was one area, through our website, providing information and resources. Another area we found that we were able to get involved with was linking professional societies, government organisations, NGOs, or international NGOs, and trying to sort of play a central, sort of a connecting role. TEL in Japan sort of sits in a sort of unusual position. In Japan, many of our therapists, our staff, are Japanese, but we also have a connection with the international community. So we're in a position to play an active role between these various organisations that were all trying to come in and help the situation. I'll talk to you a little bit about psychological first aid training. That's one area we felt that this is an area we can get involved in. We can have an impact here. I'll describe in detail a bit later what that was about. And connected to that, we did go out to the community, to schools, to organisations, talk about coping mechanisms, how to cope after a disaster. So first of all, on the lifeline, calls came in immediately after the earthquake struck to the lifeline. The first calls actually we got were from abroad. I guess people were looking at the foreign media, the local news stations. They heard what happened, they were trying to call Japan to talk to loved ones, and they couldn't get through, and they were starting to worry. So we got calls from the States and other places of people trying to connect. And our first response basically there was to try and gather information, and we could tell, most people were looking for people in Tokyo, they couldn't get through because the cell network was down. So we could describe a little bit of what was going on and help them with that. Predominant issues that were coming in from Lifeline. Anxiety was a major issue, a lot of uncertainty about what to do. People who didn't speak Japanese, that was obviously more confusing, and there was a lack of accurate information. Here are some statistics. I've got 2 sets for you. One is from Inoshino-Denmark, and the other is from TEL. So Inoshino-Denmark, the Japanese lifeline, which we are a member of the Federation, they set up a disaster-free dial, specifically for people affected. And for a 10-day period, in that 10-day period, they took 1,515 calls, a lot of medical issues, and a lot of life issues, which is a very general category that includes things like anxiety and depression and other areas. They keep very close statistics on suicide-related calls. I put those there just to bear in mind for things I'm going to talk about a little later. You do see a lot of calls that have some form of ideation, but only 1,0 active suicide. For TEL, the statistics here are for the month that followed. So from mid-March through to mid-April. And we had 530 calls to our line. The 2 areas that I've highlighted, one life issues and the other is information. So these are 2 areas where I noticed, compared to statistics from 2010 and 2009, that there was a fluctuation. So within life issues, that includes anxiety. The number of calls related to anxiety shot up from something like under 10% in a normal year. It shot up to about 23%. And for information calls, it's normally under 10% now, but it shot up to 15%. So that reflects the kinds of calls that were coming in. Again, for suicide-related, some ideation, but much less, only 1 From the calls that were coming in, we could pinpoint some certain causes for a lot of the anxiety that was happening. One of the things that seems to be causing tremendous anxiety for people in the community was a lot of information that was being presented in the media. People were watching the news, and the news seemed to be having field days. And watching the news reports was causing people to feel even more anxiety. The second factor was pressure from loved ones back home, who were watching probably the same news reports, and then were calling and pressuring them to leave. And then another factor was people leaving. So a lot of them made a choice to relocate, and that in itself, when others around them were leaving, they became very disoriented, weren't sure what to do, and what decisions to make about where they should go. This is just an example of some reports that came in the foreign media. I do appreciate the Sun and the Mirror in the UK. You know that they are the worst, probably the worst for hyperbole.
Did they hack into your phone?
But across the board, I think many people talked about reports they had on CNN and BBC. I personally remember waking up one morning, switching on the news, I was still half asleep, and trying to get a cup of coffee, and Lucy Hawkins from the BBC announced, "Run for your life, that's the message from the Japanese government." So I basically projectile spat my coffee halfway across the living room, rushed to the computer to find out what had happened. Well, actually nothing happened since the day before. Just the Japanese government said, "Please move away from the reactor." A little different. The way in which the news is translated to us or given to us has a huge impact on people in those areas. So in the short term, there were a lot of headlines, a lot of disaster scenarios painted for us. But that hasn't stopped in a sense. Reports still keep coming out in the media in the long term that are still talking about this issue in a different way. And one that draws a lot of concern for us is that of suicide. A lot of news reports are coming out that are connecting suicides with people affected in the disaster area. And again, this is something that draws some degree of concern for us. Because, is it true? I think there is an assumption in the community that it is true, that people have been affected, and therefore it's natural to imagine that this would happen, and Japan is a country that has a lot of suicide. But I would certainly want to try and put the brakes on that a little bit and to be careful. Recent statistics from May do show certain increases in certain areas, but I think that it is too soon to jump the gun and assume that it's connected to a disaster. And there is a wealth of information out there from disasters, including Kobe, Taiwan, and other parts of the world, where studies show that there was no increase in suicide after the disaster. So it's something that we are particularly concerned about because of the impact they have on mental health in the community when the news reports things in a certain way, and particularly if they report it inaccurately. Why does it matter? Well, I think the one thing is underestimate people's resilience. People that have been affected can be very resilient, and in many cases can, despite a lot of stresses, can recover naturally over time. And I think that when you say that you make these sort of links and assumptions, it tends to sort of describe people as somewhat helpless. It tends to make them. Another thing is simply things like misallocation of resources. And after a disaster, it's very important that resources get directed to the right places. I'm sure you've all heard stories of, ships full of rice sitting in docks waiting to be offloaded onto trucks that aren't there, and these things happen after natural disasters. And it's true in mental health too. Resources need to be applied into the right areas. So the way things are portrayed in the media is incredibly important. When those statistics came out, the news reports appeared everywhere, so statistics from May, immediately trying to make this connection. I was very interested to see this article that appeared in the news that actually said, well, there was a celebrity suicide, Miri Uehara, and the government body, the task force that looks at suicide, actually considering that it may be that. It was a copycat scenario that was causing that increase, and not a disaster at all. And certainly there is a huge body of evidence that shows that after somebody faints, commits suicide, that there is an increase in suicide statistics. I can give you multiple examples of that. Something we like to do, or try to do at TEL, is to try and increase awareness. The World WHO has guidelines on reporting suicides. They are very easily accessible. Google it. Now, why the press don't follow these, I don't know. But this is a summary 10 simple points that journalists can follow when reporting suicide. I saw a recent example in Kyoto from Japan Times the other day that failed on 8 out of those 10 points. So, as I'm talking about the issue of suicide and reporting suicide, and we're talking about it, I might as well preach. How you doing? You okay? Need to talk? Okay, the second area that we tried to get involved with was online information and news. So trying to get people accurate information. People were watching the news, and that was causing a lot of hypervigilance. People were watching the news again and again, the same news again and again. And that was increasing anxiety levels. So we tried to get accurate information and disseminate that to the community. We also produced resources. So in the short term, we looked at things like how to try and connect with someone who's missing, how to connect to your own language, lifelines, things for immediate response. And in the more long term, we looked at things like trying to help people through disseminating information about how to cope. So for example, we produced these worksheets, these handouts, what to expect after a traumatic event. And because we're a very community-based organization, we're very lucky. We've got volunteers and people connected to us to translate it into something like 17 languages. And we produce this for adults and parents and teachers. Here are the statistics for the TEL website. You can see during that period, the number of hits on the website, people seeking accurate information shot up. At the peak, it was something like 10 times the normal rate. We normally get about 100 hits a day, and it shot up 10 times that number, and then settled down to about twice, 200 hits a day. So there are a lot of challenges with information sharing. It's very important to try and disseminate accurate information. There are a lot of people out there who were maybe trying to help, I don't know, but what they were trying to share may not always be the most up-to-date, accepted practices when it comes to mental health. And here's just an example. Things to be cautious about is that things like taking a one-day seminar does not make people an expert in PTSD, and you're not ready to go out and counsel people. It can be quite dangerous to assume such things. Even the word trauma is something that is something that's generally avoided in the literature. Other things going on. Lack of evidence base in many interventions. Inappropriate screening. Lots of people want to do research when these things happen. And again, motivations may be really helpful. There probably is more research that needs to be done on ways to help people. But research on whether disasters are bad for people, I think we can conclude that disasters are not good for people. Focus on pathology again. So looking at trauma, looking at pathology in the sense of, and studies, when you go to areas of people, you can find people exhibiting stresses that are synonymous with PTSD, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's experiencing trauma, that everybody has PTSD, that everybody needs specialized care. That is an assumption. Okay, I'll come back to that topic when I talk about psychological first aid. But the third thing we tried to do was linking with professional organizations and governments and NGOs. So you've got a lot of organizations all trying to get involved, all trying to help. You have Japan mental health organizations, you have the government, prefectural and local levels, you have international NGOs that want to come in and help. It's a lot of different organizations, all trying to do something, all trying to carry out their missions. And that can create a lot of complications. So TEL found itself, willing or not, wanting or not, sort of in a central position there, and we tried the best we could to try and interact with different organizations, to try and find out what they were doing, to try and connect people, to try and be part of the process, as well as to try and see where we could fit, see how best we could help out there. I think there are a number of challenges that we found in trying to do that. Between different organizations, a lack of aligned goals between professional organizations. You've got a lot of, these different organizations are very diverse, very different in nature. They have different objectives. There was a lack of information sharing. Difficult to find out what was going on and who was doing what. For some organizations, perceived hierarchies of who they wanted to work with, who they didn't want to work with, who they felt they should work with. Of course, language and cultural barriers played a part in this. There were, I think, Japanese organizations that didn't particularly want to deal with international organizations. No consistent application of agreement and guidelines. I mean, if you bear in mind that mental health already is somewhat under-resourced before the break in Japan, coping with the demands afterwards can be a tremendous strain. I think in Japan, comparatively speaking, there's no real tradition of multidisciplinary teamwork. And I mentioned before that's something that we try to do consistently with children and families, getting people from different disciplines to work together. But that isn't something that's been traditional here within mental health. A reluctance to accept help from NGOs and from outsiders. I know after COVID, there's a lot of criticism of the government from people trying to come in to help when they were delayed. I think that they try to do better here, but still, I think there are a lot of organisations on that level that were reluctant or just didn't want to deal with others from outside. And something else, volunteers not being prepared for what they're going into. A lot of different people with no particular background in mental health or anything else wanted to go up and help, and they weren't prepared for what they were going to experience. And that led to some stress. So this last point is an area that we felt, well, maybe we could get involved and help here. And that's why we got involved with psychological first aid. We teamed up with an organisation called International Medical Pool, and thanks to grants from them in America and the American Jewish Distribution Committee, we were able to roll out some to train our people, as well as help train others in the community for psychological first aid. So basically, what is psychological first aid? So basically, this is very much in line with that public health model. It's about being supportive, about being respectful, humane, and helping people in a practical manner. So we're talking about dealing with people that are first responders, people that are volunteers, people that are going to affected areas. Helping them to carry out their role. Now remember, we're not talking about creating counsellors. We're not talking about putting people that go out there and suddenly become experts. We're talking about people that are going out to do a job, and that while doing that job, when interacting with people around them that are affected, they can do it in a way in which they, at very least, do no harm. It's a very modest objective. But something we heard often again was that when people go to those areas, they will have an impact. It could be negative, it could be positive, but it will have an impact. So we're trying to make sure that people go are prepared for what they have to deal with, and they have some awareness of the feelings and experiences of people in that community that is affected, that they interact with them in a respectful way that respects their age, their culture, and also prepares them themselves for what they're about to deal with. We talk about learn, and look, and listen, and link, very basic ideas, learn what's going on, look at the situation, assess it, listen to people if people want to talk, don't force people to talk, don't try and drag experiences out of them, but if they want to talk, be there, do it in an environment that's respectful, not open to everybody else, and help link people, because there will be people that need help, it could be any variety of help, and help to link them to the resources they need. If there is a mental health issue, link them to those, link them to that specialised care. Psychological first aid is based on the IASC guidelines. Again, this is very important. What we're trying to do is follow best practices and follow guidelines so that we can respond in the most effective way. These guidelines were brought together from experiences in multiple disasters, war zones, and other experiences around the world. Something like 28 agencies are involved in developing them. So what it's trying to do is trying to help very much from a public health perspective, not purely from a clinical perspective, that focuses on things like trauma, but looks at it from a community-based, broader perspective. Talks about building unavailable resources, strengthening recovery for local people. Clinical interventions only for most severe disorders. So if you look at the statistics here, despite things like news reports that suggest, or even recent research that suggests that a great deal of people that are affected by disaster need some form of specialized care, if you look at the statistics here, you can see that even before something like a disaster, within the community, the number of people experiencing severe disorder is something like 2 to 3%. And after a disaster, it only goes up to about 3 to 4%. Okay? Only 3 to 4%. Even here, with mild and moderate mental disorders, up to about 20%. So what can we learn from that? Well, this is a diagram, a picture that's very central to what I'm talking about, really. If you look at people that are affected by a disaster, here is that broad spectrum. The base here, basic services and security. Everybody needs that. Everybody that's affected needs basic services and security. And then you have community and family support. So, a lot of people need that. And with that, despite the fact that people may have experienced some of the symptoms of trauma, that with community and family support, over time, people will recover naturally. People will come back without needing specialised care. Then you have to focus on non-specialised supporters. People like, for example, Life Lines very much within that bracket. People that have been trained, they're not professionals, but they're trained in providing support, as well as people that take people they train. And at the top, you have a small number that will require specialised care, only 3 to 4% probably in the community. So we felt that psychological first aid training volunteers, training first responders, training other lifelines was a really important way for us to go, because within this model, we're talking about all of this group here. And if we can train people here, we can have a much larger impact on the communities that are affected. Bearing in mind that that training will include helping them to understand and recognise people that do need specialised care, and helping get them, linking them to that specialised care as well. So this is the area we focused on. You can see it on the bottom here. So we carried out first aid trainings. We have training in Denmark, we were in Tokyo, we went to Sendai. We worked with all kinds of organisations. And we're continuing that process. So we'll keep doing it as long as volunteers are going there. We will help provide that training to people. In addition to that, we also, again, back to coping. After the disaster, we also went out. The last area that we got involved with, going to schools, going to companies, getting out into the community is what we do. That's what TEL does. We go out and talk about these issues and try to provide support through that. What were some of the challenges that we have observed or faced or experienced in doing that? We found that still somewhat discredited practice still abound out there. One of the big ones is debriefing. I don't know if you've heard about debriefing. I think once upon a time debriefing was the way to go. There was an incident, disaster, debrief. And that's what a lot of people working in as they were trained to do, to debrief. Now debriefing basically is it's like getting a bunch of people that are affected and okay, come together and okay, we're going to talk about it. Now, what did you see? What did you experience? Share with the group. What did you experience? What did you see? And tell us about that. And for a while it was believed that that was the best way to get it out, to get people to talk about it. But it was found that this was actually having the opposite effect. The briefing was not having a positive effect. It was, in many cases, it was actually having a negative effect. Now, why would that be? Partly perhaps because, in a sense, it's forcing people. We're not giving them a choice. And maybe you had an experience that you don't want to talk about. And maybe you did something in a disaster that you don't feel good about. And the last thing you want to do is share it with people. So I think things have moved on since then. I mean, if people need to talk and want to talk, fine, they should have the opportunity to do that. Perhaps in a private setting where they feel comfortable and they can do so at their own pace. But something like debriefing is still something that's going around. It's still going around. And even though it's been largely found to have no negative effect, it's still being used. So a lot of these things are still going on. I mentioned evacuation of children. We were approached by an organisation to get involved with some children that have been taken down from Tohoku and being housed. And the problem with things like that is that best practice model considers it is not good, for example, to separate children from their parents, from their communities. As much as possible, it is better to keep families and communities together when possible. And so, when people are doing different things like that, when children are being taken away to new environments, strange environments, away from the family, is not exactly best practice and creates a lot of complications of its own. I think we can see some opportunity. When something like this happens, companies will come in and go to you and say, go to your company and say, hey, we've got a one-day workshop and why don't you use it? And in a sense, they're profiting from these sorts of things. Using buzzwords like trauma and PTSD and those kinds of things. But again, what kind of practices do they follow? Is this really, is it really best practice? Unfortunately, often they don't have the resources that other organizations don't. And again, lack of volunteer preparedness. I mean, we're trying to do everything we can to provide things like social because they train people, but a lot of volunteers aren't going unprepared and experiencing stress and burnout as a result. So where is TEL? Just not going forward. I think that what we're trying to do here is very much in line with what we already do. We've tried to cover the spectrum from specialised care down to sort of public health model of working in the community. And we'll continue working with support groups, other lifelines in schools, and basically fit across with this model here. So that is what we normally do with lifeline is in affected areas. Trying to cover that spectrum from the public health side through to specialised care. Trying to help promote best practices within the community and within the mental health field. A quick thank you to some of the organisations that provided grants and support to us. TEL is an organisation of 8 people, 8 staff, some of which are only part-time. So thanks to some of the grants that we received, we were able to get involved. Here's our basic contact information. And just about that's all.
Thank you very much. The lecture attracted lots of individuals because you were speaking, you all dribbled in. They heard about it, that's why we kept the window open. So I think we'll start with questions. We have about 50 minutes, so it feels.
Thank you very much. The question is it a good idea to give education regarding the first aid for people in general? My awareness is that some people are not by nature qualified to do that kind of first aid, like they have a character or pushy or assertive, and it won't change soon. Also, the counseling may need a certain special knowledge, based on my understanding, and giving up the educating people in general and making a consensus to ask specialists. That seems much quicker and shorter.
Yeah, it depends. The idea, first of all, someone training psychological first aid, or even this applies to our lifeline counsellors, are not specialists, so they require training. And we train, for example, lifeline, we train in kind of Rogerian, non-directed type of counselling. But we are very clear to define the limits of what we do. We can't diagnose, for example. We would never diagnose someone with a condition. What we would try to do is that we would listen, allow someone to talk, and then based upon what someone tells us, we would try and link them to support. So if they have an issue, there may be a support group that we can link them to. And that will be a group that has a much deeper, in-depth knowledge of that problem. And if it's a mental health issue, we might recommend that they consider face-to-face counselling, because then it's a specialist that has a much deeper understanding than we do. So we define our boundaries very clearly. And again, that's something about what worries me, worries us. When something like a disaster happens, then people start pushing trauma trainings, this, that, and the other, is what are they really teaching? And are those boundaries being clearly defined for the people that do that? Or are those people now suddenly experts in the area? As for personality, so some people are kind of pushy and they wouldn't do well at it. Well, let me say, for example, for the lifeline training, we take something like, I don't know, 25 people, let's say, in a training. And the number that actually graduates would be lucky at about 17, maybe. And why do people leave? Well, really the ones that will realize that this isn't for me. I think people, when they go through certainly a lifeline training, understand their own limitations and whether they can do it. We spend an awful lot of time putting people through role plays where they get a lot of experience and they get to realize whether this is something they're able to do or not. As with something like PFA training, it's a 2-day training, it's quite short. You know, I think that whether someone in 2 days, I don't think that we're looking to turn those people into counselors either, really. We're just looking at basically, really at a minimum level, do no harm. So whatever your personality is or whoever you are, you're going to an affected area. Hopefully, those 2 days of training will at least understand a little bit about what people are experiencing, and whilst carrying out your role, you will do no harm, at least. So again, knowing boundaries, modest objective.
Yes.
So, could you explain some characteristics you think would be important for what you would look for in training?
If it's a lifeline? Okay, so lifeline.
Is it the lifeline or for psychological first aid? Or these are 2 different areas.
Let me define both for you. So for the lifeline, basically we run 2 trainings a year, okay, and that will run for 3 to 4 months. So it's quite an intensive training. The minimum age is basically 21, and you need to be a fluent English speaker. Those are only credentials. You don't need a background in mental health. You don't need those sorts of qualifications, but you definitely need the right stuff. So when you come in, we interview you very carefully, and you know, basically what you need is an ability to empathize, to understand what somebody else is experiencing. We focus very much on feelings. We focus on understanding how other people are feeling. We ask you actually end up sort of experiencing a lot about your own personal feelings and addressing those feelings. So you need to be on that level. You need to be able to understand and empathize with others. You need to be able to show called UPR, unconditional positive regard. People basically not judging you. So you need the sort of personality where you can listen without judgment, and really the central is listen. To be able to listen. Now for psychological first aid training, this is a 2-day training for people, for example, that are going up to areas that are affected, to work, whatever. So in those cases, I mean, it's people are going there to do a job, and this is just a way to help prepare them for what they're going to help them prepare for what they'll see, what they're involved with, and to help them essentially do no harm. So it's much more sort of limited.
But there are a lot of positive skills people learn in psychological first aid training. They apply to Jason's partner, and I'm on the professional side of the organization, and we will have delivered 18 psychological first aid trainings by the end of August. And they include primarily NGOs, professional organizations and societies, primary care physicians, orphanages, and other groups, including people who are digging out mud and whatnot. But they learn active listening skills. They learn how to establish what the resources are in the community, to begin to do a quick assessment of who needs to be linked to resources. They know what typical responses are to a very serious event, a disaster like this. So what is normal? And once they understand what normal is, they understand that many people are going to be resilient and are going to be able to recover. It really has to do with capacity building for people on the ground. How to help them, to some extent, help themselves and activate. And then to be able to look and listen and triage the small number of people who they learn by virtue of functioning really going to need some specialized help and how to get them to the right places. So that's what it's about. But it helps people do their job better. So if they're digging out mud, or if they're providing medical care, or they're assisting an orphanage, or they're reestablishing a hospital setting, it helps them do their job. They're not providing counseling. It is not a clinical intervention. That's important to understand.
And bear in mind, so even with lifelong training, this is several months, and you will learn a lot more about specific issues that you may face in the lifeline. But even then, you will not diagnose, you will only refer people onto specialized services if you think that they require, if they have that need. Again, very similar to PFA. Hey, let me just introduce actually, by the way, we have a couple of people in the audience from TEL. We have the TEL Counselling Director, Linda Simmons there, and Vicky Scorgi, who's the Assistant Lifeline Director. So they also are intimately involved in what we've been doing. So you have questions, I welcome them to jump in as well, and can help give them a break.
Questions? Yes.
First question, how are you financing your organization? I think your organization, the task of your organization is very important. It helps people in virtual clubs. So is it mostly donation? Because that is my question one. And the question two is, I think it is very difficult to communicate with the people who is faceless. You get the anonymous call. You don't know, maybe you know whether the person is male or female, but you don't know his or her age, occupation, or the background, unless he speaks. And you, the speaker, the counselor, is also anonymous, isn't it? And it's only one-time session. That is a very different point from psychiatrist or the counselor's meeting. They can tell the client, please come again, we discuss again in different situation, in different time. And it is really a one-time meeting. Do you ever tell your caller, the caller to call back again, or let's talk about again in some time, several days later? Does it happen?
Okay, that's a lot. Okay, so question one was about financing. So, as an organisation, we are a non-profit organisation. We have a number of sources of income. One is from our professional face-to-face health centre. They charge will be on a flexible fee, so we have an income that comes in from face-to-face counselling. We run 3 charity events every year. John Raymond over there. He organises 3 events that raise funds for the organisation. We apply for grants, often for specific programs that we are running, and we go out and ask for donations, and that includes our board of directors. We go out and have fundraising and corporations, as well as down to that box at the back. That's how we fundraise. Okay. Question 2 was about, okay, how you deal with, okay, we're talking about telephone counselling, so it's not face-to-face counselling, you don't see the person calling, it could be the only time you ever speak to them. And if they call back, they will talk to somebody else. Well, okay, to speak to that, it's true. I mean, I think that, to be honest with you, when talking to someone on the phone, when actively listening, I think you actually can know a lot about the person that is calling, but having said that, you don't want to assume anything. So telephone counselling around the world basically follows a very similar model, a very non-directed model. It doesn't tell you what to do, it focuses very much on listening. So the focus is on allowing you as a person time and space to talk about whatever issue is going on for you. I'm not going to give you advice, I'm going to tell you what you should do, because I don't know you. And a 5-minute, a 10-minute, 60-minute conversation is not going to give me the complete picture of you. So it would be probably foolish for me to attempt to even imagine that I can understand all of what's going on for you. Better for me to allow you to talk about what you need to talk about. Hopefully, over time and through the process, you will come to the decision that is right for you. So the idea is to empower you, rather than I am so smart, I know exactly what you need to do. You know what you need to do. Okay? So I'm just providing space for you to work through. Now, because if you would call the line, that's not always a one-time call. So you do get calls that will call regularly. It's extremely important that because when they call the lifeline, they will talk to a different person. It's very important that everybody, no matter who they call, whoever's on the line at that time, is providing the same kind of support. Because if they're all on the same page, providing the same kind of support, doesn't matter so much who they're talking to. The person in the line is going to listen to them, he's going to show empathy, he's not going to judge them, he's going to let them talk. I guess that's how it works. On a good day.
And can I just say, at least I needed to be, the phone councils have a wealth of information about linking them into resources and services that are out there in the community, if they're at that point.
And we're quite lucky, we've had 40 years of people calling us and asking us questions. And they go find an answer, put it in a resource, which is now available on the TEL website.
Do you have any other question as well? Yeah.
No, that's all. Your answer was excellent. You said the answer is always in the person. In the person. So you have to dig it up. You are helping the person to find the right answer by themselves. That's it.
I like it.
Other question? Yes.
Questions. One is, have you do anything with the media, sort of, or have you done anything with the media industry in terms of how they should deal with this? Because I've noticed that it's not just foreign media, but also Japanese media started interviewing people right after the disaster. That's obvious. I think that's when challenged later that these things happened. I think there are debates as to what we should allow children to do, what sort of play they should do, etc. So I wonder if you do anything with that. And the second question is use this sort of global kind of guidelines and standards, etc. And I'm wondering if there's anything Japan specific. To what extent should be local context be considered?
That's a really good question. Okay, so let's go. Question one was about dealing with media. So yeah, I mean, as a Lifeline director, actually, I've always been contacted by media, often foreign media. Suicide again is a topic that the foreign media are very interested in about Japan, so they contact TEL and ask questions about that. And again, I'm happy to talk to anybody, but again, I'm cautious and I want to push that message of following guidelines and reading stories of that nature, because it continues. I mean, I wrote a letter to the Japan Times just this week because of another article that came out, and I mentioned it briefly before, but on something like 8 out of 10 points in those guidelines, they got it wrong, and so I'm happy to remind them about that as well. But the media is a very important obviously source, so we need to interact and work with them. And I think we would take any opportunity to talk to the media to help promote things like best practices. What question 2 was?
Japan specific.
Japan specific. When we talked to IMC about doing PFA training, the first thing we did was sat down for something like 2 days and talk about Japan. So in every case, whenever they would go to a new country and deal with a new situation, the first thing to do is to look at the culture and talk about what's happening there and to deal with what is appropriate.
And more specifically, prior to each psychological first aid training, there's a needs questionnaire for the group that needs to be trained. So not only has the training been localized to be culturally appropriate for Japan, it's specifically oriented for each group's needs.
And could I just say, with that, what we did do was the population that was affected here in Japan was significantly elderly. And so that was something that was built into this program that was not necessarily the issue in other countries and other disasters. So we're looking at a very elderly affected population here, and that was something that was built into this program.
Let me maybe follow up. Is this follow up to the questions? I mean, okay. So let me maybe follow up on your answer on country specific from the question that Gucci-sensei asked. What would you say to someone who's not Japanese? What are the main things to know about Japanese culture that you think are Japan specific? I mean, I arrive here, I just don't know much about Japan. What are the most important aspects of Japanese society, culture that I should be aware of if I'm going to be involved either in medical relief, in psychological counseling, and any aspect of your work?
gosh, that is a good question. I think there are a lot of things you can do. I think respecting things like, I mentioned before about, culture, or for example, like, elderly people, which you mentioned, there is sort of an age hierarchy in a sense, and showing respect to people that are older would be something. I think the way you speak to people, politeness is another thing. I think that being aware that, for example, like, Tohoku, people say that people from Tohoku especially are very gambare and gambare zuru and stuff. But, being aware that there may be a face that people put on, but behind it there's still people that are hurt and still feeling different kinds of emotions, and making people aware of that. I think there's a whole range of
one issue in the shelters that we found was that Japan's respect for the community as a whole, so that there were mothers who were really worn to a frazzle if they had a young child who was disruptive in a shelter, because it wasn't done. They didn't want to bother the other people, or elderly people who were so concerned about disrupting their neighbors that they weren't drinking so that they wouldn't have to use the toilet and were becoming very dehydrated. So understanding that Japan's special interest and awareness of not disrupting their neighbors and their culture, and that you were going to have to come at things from a certain angle and make sure that you could provide relief to people within the shelters and within the organization that understood their position and their concern for not disrupting other people, not asking for things that they might need for themselves or their own family. So that was an issue for us. But the bottom line is making sure that you're asking people what they need, as opposed to coming in and saying, I think I'll deliver a 4-course Italian meal because I happen to be a famous Italian chef, and there's some of that going on right now. So, it really has to do with any culture, trying to find out what do the people in a particular community need, what do they want, to try and increase the capacity of the people within the community. And even if you're Japanese from Tokyo and you go up to the affected areas, you're a foreigner. It's not as if it's Japanese or non-Japanese. If you're an outsider, you're an outsider. So we try to try and understand that even with our Japanese trainers coming from Tokyo, they're outsiders. They're not members of the community.
And I think some of these things I think are sort of applicable probably in most communities. I think when interacting with, say, elderly, older men, I think that a kind of a straightforward approach of what's wrong, tell me about your feelings, how are you doing, kind of thing, is just not going to work. But maybe if you see someone that you think maybe has an issue, you could come very indirect, get involved with that person in something, provide an indirect opportunity to one kind of strong, probably just a issue.
So you have a question in the back.
As an organization, do you have internal quality control methods? For example, is somebody listening on calls, or do you tape calls so that you can ensure that your philosophy that everyone's giving the same kind of advice is really true?
Okay. So I think in all areas of mental health, supervision is a must, and the Lifeline is no different. So anyone that goes into the Lifeline must be in supervision, and it's mandatory. So even if you don't do shifts in the month, you have to go to supervision. The role of supervision, a number of functions for it. One is to provide you opportunity to talk about the cause that you have, as a problem or you felt maybe you didn't handle so well and you want to get more opinions about it. It's a way to further education, it's a way to update people about what's going on, but it's also a way to talk about things like quality control, to make sure that people are all on the same page, that we're following some procedures. Then within the fund itself, myself and the supervisors, so we have 12 supervisors, and we've now created an extra 3 floating supervisors that can go into the phone, listen to the call, with a double function of quality control, but also to provide the opportunity for the council after the call, if there's something to talk about, if there's a question they have, they can ask it directly, or they have to wait until it's a supervisory session to do that. So we have a process of counsellors, and people are trainers, and supervisors, and director and assistant director, and we all work sharing information, very careful to check the intakes and rules that happen, encourage people to have a suicide rule particularly, report they have an issue with, contact us and talk to you. So we're very careful about the whole process that we go through. On the Lifeline side,
Yeah, supervision happens on the clinical side as well. People are supervised on a regular basis, whether or not they've been functioning for 30 years in case conferences. On our professional counseling side, you don't bark into somebody else's session because of confidentiality. It wouldn't be done. But if people need help, that they'll invite somebody else into the session, get a second opinion right on the spot, if somebody was crucial. So, yeah, but we have a lot of quality control on there. All the charts are reviewed on a regular basis. We have team case conferences and peer counseling and peer supervision that goes on a regular basis. And it's all done.
I'm sorry, just going back to what you mentioned, the challenges of being an outsider from Tokyo being very Japanese. Some of us have been trying to help people there, like for example, I guess my question is, what's being done about the challenges as far as like working with the government? Because in some efforts, like for example, we've tried to open up our homes to victims who might be staying in a shelter, things like that. And there seems to be a problem with the government. The government is offering money to people who are victims, and I forget the limit what it is right now at this point. But the problem is that if they take shelter or take help from certain organizations, certain people, they run the risk of forfeiting that government money. I'm not sure of the exact details, but I'm just wondering if you had any information about that, because this is what we were told, and this is what kind of stalled some of the efforts that we've been doing, because we know someone who actually has a business there, and so we've been trying to help through that, through personal contacts, but we've still been stalled, even though we have that personal, and it's from the government, it seems to be, or at least that's the impression that we're being given by the people who are doing it.
We meaning you're visiting an organization? Or?
No, well, we're just private. We know someone who owns a business, and he's taken upon himself to organize a bunch of us to do things. So, but the problem we're running into, and some organizations are running into this as well, from what we hear. So I'm just wondering, is there some dialogue going on about that? Because we're running into some roadblocks.
The only thing I can really add to say about it is that I think that although a lot of people are volunteering and want to get involved, I would certainly encourage people to do it through organizations that are experienced in providing support and help rather than doing it on an individual level. So I would encourage you to contact, depending on what you want to do, contact NGOs or organizations that are helping. And as to the government and their connection and stopping funding, I don't know anything about it. Maybe else can contribute.
Small business owner. But at this time, I'd like to introduce myself that I was born and raised in Iwate, where the tsunami hit. And I have a brother who is helping victims regular basis, probably 3 days a week. So as long as I communicate with him, there are 3 areas that are still untouched by government anything. 1, money from Red Cross did not reach them yet. So they feel they are totally forgotten. And even a lot of bad things are whispered amongst them about Red Cross. Because of the operating expenses, all these things may reach to 30% or even more. That's the number 1 area. Number 2 area, medical services, regardless of what the government says, hopeless. Because medications, doctors, gone, disappeared for whatever reasons. And rehabilitation of the building and also the organizational rehabilitation hasn't been established as of yet. The 3rd area, the kids, those who lost parents. The number is astonishing one, reaching already 2,500, or probably more. They know, because they couldn't just simply identify. And those are people taken by the families and all these things. So those are the areas mostly needed urgent help. And the situation is very critical, but Mr. Khan, he cannot. He doesn't do anything. And local government, there is a difference. Miyagi is hopeless, Iwate is very good because of the support of Ozawa. They get the materials. Miyagi, governor talks a lot, but useless. No material supply at all. So you have the intelligence, you have the organizational strength, and also the fourth area, if I may add, that's the Jietai and lesbian soldiers are mentally disordered. Because they talked about the victims and their own experiences after 7:30, after dinner, and everybody was just. So this kind of thing was totally not listed in the paper, and I think that you have some areas to penetrate to help them. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, there's something I heard that there's still a lot of disparity in areas that are getting help and areas that are not getting.
Is there any difference in the trend of what people call to you? Like right after the earthquake, there must be shock, or they don't know, they lost everything, but after that it will turn to like they have to leave, and how they have to live. It must be issues. Is there any trend difference?
Yes, I mean, as I mentioned, immediately after the earthquake, and for the couple of weeks that followed it, I think a lot of anxiety, a lot of people concerned about what to do, a lot of people looking for information about tsunamis, and the Fukushima problem definitely kept that continuing. So people were experiencing stress, really not just like a single incident which ended; it was continuing, and that was putting tremendous stress on people, I think. And then I think what happened after that is that I think that what happened still was affecting people, but it started to affect them more indirectly. So for example, if you in your day-to-day life are already having problems, relationship problems, or anxiety problems, or depression, or whatever, then this sort of compounded it. So in the first couple of weeks after, yes, people were talking specifically about this is happening, what do I do? As time went by, it became less specific about that. It became more about what was happening for them, but what was happening as a whole in society was impacting on that and exacerbating that. And that continued.
Do you know geographically where your calls are coming from? And if you do, after 3/11, can you give an example of how you connect with what you're hearing on the phones to other NGOs who are providing relief?
We don't ask anybody anything who calls the line, so it is anonymous, and we don't try and ask anything. So we keep basic statistics about people that call the line, so we can generally discern what kind of age group they're in. Obviously, if they're a man or a woman, we can often determine if they're Japanese or North American or European. And like all other lifelines, we keep some basic statistics of that, and we share those statistics for the purposes of understanding why people are calling the line. Therefore, we train people to train them to be able to respond to those issues. But we don't go too far into delving. We will never ask them where are you. Now, sometimes indirectly you can understand from what they're talking about, generally speaking, who they are. They may volunteer it, but it's not something we would delve into. The other problem is that, again, because it is anonymous, we respect what they're telling us. We don't share that with anybody else, really. Again, we talk about general issues that are being talked about, but we don't share too much information. But certainly, TEL has been involved, so we have been involved with NGOs and other organizations and what's going on. So we can, from what we learn, understand to some degree, but we're very careful. We don't share, really. We have to respect anybody that calls the line that we won't discuss with hotels.
I think you mentioned that one of the data points that kind of spiked after the earthquake was requests for information, for example. So I was curious to know if you were able to connect that type of data with any other NGOs who might be also in a position to provide information?
Right. I mean, we got information from lots of different sources. Again, I think it's a very community-based organisation. We're very fortunate that people who connect us with pretty good information from train schedules and blackouts through to other lifelines, what we're doing, information about the region, all kinds of information. So we were fortunate and we tried to disseminate that as much as possible, primarily through our website.
Follow up slightly linked to this question. It's hard to get useful data yet from the Immigration Bureau, but based on what we can read in say we can read Financial Times, based on the number of foreign students in Japan, based on people who come to our seminar, or just going to restaurants here in areas where there's really large numbers of Westerners, clearly the numbers are down. I mean, not back to normal. I mean, that seems to be the general consensus. The percentages in question, the basic fact they're not as many as they should be, seems to be undeniable. What do you think are most of the anxieties that your Western foreigners exhibit? Why do you think they're not here, in other words? Why do you think they've gone?
Why do they leave?
Yeah. No, I mean, we talk about fear of earthquakes and Fukushima, losing business going down. I mean,
I think it depends. I think that depends on nationality to some degree. And I think that different embassies gave out different information, and based on that, some people may decide to leave. I think some people were probably relocated by their company and had varying degrees of choice about where they went. I think people with families with children may have been more likely because of concerns for their children. It depends. I mean, for some people, non-Japanese, they've been here 20 years, 30 years, or they're married to some huge families. I mean, the people like that, they're not going anywhere.
they have nowhere to, we're looking at the more mobile ones.
Yeah, but for some people, the expat community, for example, they've probably only been here a short number of time, and they're here on assignment, and so if their company didn't relocate them, they might make a choice for themselves or for their family to that's something they want to do, and there you go. So I think that, really, it's very hard to say why people leave. Everybody made a choice for some of the kids, and I think it's undeniable.
Are you still getting calls about individuals worried, depressed or worried about radiation quakes? I mean, is this still going on, even in July?
I think so. I mean, much less so than before, I think. But again, I think people are still concerned. I think it does express itself indirectly through other issues. But I think people, I mean, just personally, I know people who are still trying to leave. So I don't think that's going to be.
Okay. You have a question? Okay.
And just related to that, so a lot of your telephone volunteers and a lot of your volunteers have kind of gone down a bit as well. For people here tonight who might want to help out volunteers, can you give a practical kind of guide of what they can do, or what's?
Well,
We hired it.
Yeah. So again, I mean, it sounds different. You probably know people around you that have left, and our number of telephone counsellors has decreased. We do two trainings a year. If we train 40 people in a year, we can lose 40 in a year. That's normally under normal circumstances. Because the population here is very transient, it can go very quickly, people with short assignments, or things like getting married and other things with babies. So we try very hard. And I mentioned TEL's Lifeline is one lifeline. We cover the whole country, one phone, one piece, one telephone counsellor at a time.
And with that, we should say, Jason, it takes 75 people to cover that.
Yeah. So
It takes 75 people to cover that line 7 days a week for 4 shifts.
Sure.
And the fact that our numbers are down is a real struggle.
It is. So normally we'll train this amount of people, but we'll lose something like that amount of people naturally. Now with the earthquake and everything that followed, that rate of attrition sped up. And we are much lower, much down than we were before, and we are facing empty shifts, and we are facing the struggle, and that will go on for months to come. So we have a training beginning in the fall, in September, and we are pushing very hard to encourage people to consider becoming a telephone counsellor.
Do you have flyers at the back, and anybody can stick a flyer somewhere that's they've been promoted or put out somewhere?
Yeah, it is a terrific opportunity if you're interested in volunteering to directly connect with someone in your own community that needs help. And we will provide you with training. So I know some people are concerned about, oh gosh, what if this kind of pool comes in, will I be able to handle it? We provide really a tremendous training program that will provide you the skills that you need to be able to respond to those kinds of calls. We mentioned supervision before. Another part of supervision is making sure that in doing the role of telephone counsellor, you are fully supported by us and you're doing it. And it is a tremendous opportunity to help the community, to educate yourself about counselling. Many of our people actually go on to do other kinds of counselling activities. So something I would encourage you, or if you know someone that you think that person's not pushy, that person would be a great telephone counsellor. That's the role you want. We definitely need to focus on this.
I have two questions. One is, I noticed you mentioned several times that a lot of people experience a lot of anxiety because of the news, right? And well, there are many people who also watch news and they just take it normally. You know, they don't go and jump off the buildings. So do you think it has to do with the personal way of each individual coping with stressful situations? The way they react to news?
Well, I think that a lot of people, I think there's a difference between watching something stressful in the news that's happening somewhere else and watching something that's happening on your doorstep. So I think that is a huge difference there. I certainly don't think that people were jumping from anywhere as a result. I mean, I think that people were very stressed. And I think it's very natural for people to experience stress. As I mentioned before, it's not something that happened once, but it was going over days and weeks. And I think that people as individuals have varying degrees of resilience and can deal with stress to varying degrees. And for some people, a little bit of stress has a big impact. For some people, they can take quite a lot of stress before it goes. But I think it was something that affected the community as a whole to varying degrees. And I think that certainly things that when the news is having a field day, there's some juicy thing, three things no less, to talk about. I think it impacts everyone to some degree or other. And for people that are experiencing a lot of stress, I think something like a lifeline is very useful because they can talk about their stress and sort of help vent it a little bit without just focusing purely on it.
Yeah, but when you hear from the news that your kids are playing on the ground where it's 20 millisieverts per hour, you know, just how you say, vaporizing your stress doesn't really help, but actions will help, like moving to another area outside of that zone. So did you notice that people were actually, instead of getting all emotional, let's actually do something to change the situation? Well, they can't suddenly clean up the area, right? But they can move out or they can relocate to another area.
Case by case, I think a lot of people were extremely stressed out by increased level of radiation, those levels were, I think, even after the health. I think people that were in areas where it wasn't so, they definitely considered leaving. But again, it's case by case. I mean, some people at their total is a great concern, there was no real threat. But they were not coping well with whatever level of stress they were dealing with, and they made the active choice to leave. And some people felt comfortable and they were closely monitoring and they felt comfortable staying.
So that comes to my second question, why do you think people leave? So,
why do people leave?
Yeah, like my theory is it's about comparing which you're losing when you're leaving and which you're going to keep while you're staying. Some people have families here, houses, rent, and it might be just worth buying food imported from abroad. Yeah, but still you have your friends, you have your job, you have your company, which you have so you might as well risk and just use imported food imported.
Yeah, I mean, I have something like 70 to 90 telephone houses, okay? And some are Japanese, and some are Japanese, and different parts of the world. Everyone haven't made a choice for themselves about what they do, and I don't. It's up to them. I mean, they assess the situation, and they assess the situation based on probably how long they've been here, the links and the roots that they have here, the family they have here, or don't have here, the degree of stress that they're able to cope with, and everyone makes their decision.
I just wanted to kind of add to what you were saying. Some people didn't have a choice. A lot of foreign students did have a choice when the governments of their home countries said, like for the U.S. for example, they said you need to go, and some people would leave. If they stayed, they would lose their scholarships. Well, basically they were forced out. So there's some stress that comes with that. Like I know some people personally that had to leave the programs they were looking forward to studying in Japan and had to leave. They had no choice whatsoever. So it's not only a matter of choice, it's a matter of being presented with, a situation where they have no choice, and that's causing them stress.
And for some students, or for some company employees, there were liability issues. Because, for example, some insurance companies, a lot of foreign students are covered by an insurance policy that basically takes care of them if they get sick, if they get wounded or injured, or what have you. And generally, there is a triggering event, which is often, for example, a warning from an embassy. If the country's put on the warning list, then they have to get out because. And that's been an issue also for students who are supposed to come to Japan. Some universities in the US, I think in other countries, have policies. If Japan's on the warning list, you can't go. Or you can go, but at least you won't get paid, you won't get your scholarship money, you won't get insurance policy, and so that's. Though I also know of company employees. I know one guy who was more or less dismissed because he left before the company told him to depart.
But even you say why the company was worried.
Well, there are issues. I think there was a TEPCO had to put it mildly a credibility issue.
A lack of information. Yeah?
So so that's, and then if your company, it depends on the country you're from. Even if you think the risk is very low, if something happens and then your employee sues you, that's going to be very expensive.
But nothing should happen. It's all safe.
Nothing.
Right?
I agree. So the thing is that you get your data from TEPCO,
which is very blurred.
Which is very blurred. And you have to make a decision. Is TEPCO telling the truth? Is TEPCO being economical with the truth? Is an American expression for lying?
Well, they were measuring radiation. They were measuring radiation every day, once per day, from Shinjuku Tower or something.
So that was the question. No, it's as they say, often better safe than sorry.
Especially with big money.
Yeah. So here we've time for one more question.
Does the Japanese government consult with you on mental health policy, and what sort of policy would you like to see on Japanese mental health? I'm guessing the answer to the first question is no.
I mean, that can lead into a point of lessons learned and what can happen in the future. I mean, I mentioned before that there isn't much of a teamwork kind of approach, and if organisations were more open to working together, I think that would be a very positive step. I'm not sure it's going to see that kind of happen.
Quite some time ago, I gave a whole talk on this series on mental health policy and government. I think the biggest issue would be better reimbursement system and a better training system. The psychiatrists there are too few of them, so that they're completely overworked and they're not able to manage what they need to manage. There aren't the kinds of wraparound and non-inpatient services that are required. There's no credentialing system that's national for psychologists, social workers, mental health therapists. And there's only just beginning to have a reimbursement policy. And so if national health care doesn't reimburse mental health, you have a problem. And you also don't have people who are trained to provide what's needed because there are resource issues. So I think training, money, reimbursement, those are the major issues there.
Anything you'd like to conclude?
I mean, I would just go back again to say that push the training program, because that's really my focus for now. TEL, I think, has played an important role We are a small non-profit. We're limited in resources, financial constraints, but we have tried hard to work with other organisations and to help as much as we can. And I think we've done an okay job. But I think we have been impacted as much as we try to influence and help the community. We have been impacted by it, and we have to work very hard. It will take us a long time to recover. I mean, for example, even on the financial side of things, there is some funding being provided for very specific disaster-related activities, but that often takes away from other regular funding that we might have, and so we're going to have to deal with that, as are a lot of other issues. And it's one of people. A lot of people have left, and we've been affected by that, so we need to get our numbers back up, quality numbers back up. So please think about that. Grab some brochures if there, and not a bad lunch. On a good day.
How long is your training program?
Yep, so it lasts like 3 to 4 months. So basically what happens is we have 2 training programs a year, one in the fall, one in the spring. The fall program will be mostly Tuesday and Thursday evenings, from about 6:30 to 9:30. That's a 3-hour block. And it will run through to December the 3rd. Okay? And the spring training will be morning to 9:30 and 12:30 on Tuesday and Thursday.
And your age group one then is?
Minimum age is 21. Also, university English to read. That's basically it. You have the right stuff. We will help you determine if you can.
Okay. Well, that was a very good movie. Well, thank you very much.